Every year around this time, my niece sends me a text asking if I'll buy some Girl Scout cookies, and I always happily oblige. But while she's selling the cookies, she's not baking the cookies. But back in the early years of the Girl Scouts, each Scout would bake her own cookies using this recipe from 1922. So thank you to my Patreon patron for sending me the idea to make these original Girl Scout cookies, this time on Tasting History. First, I wanted to let you know that when this video actually comes out, I will be in Europe doing some research for a few upcoming videos, so if you want to follow those travels, I'm going to mostly be posting on Instagram at Tasting History with Max Miller. Now here in the US, there is at least one thing that we can all agree on. Girl Scout cookies are fantastic. From trefoils to Thin Mints, Samoas to Tagalongs, ordering these cookies every year is a time-honored tradition. But when the tradition first began, the selection was rather meager. There was actually only one cookie available. It was this recipe, which was printed in the American Girl magazine in July 1922. Attention Scouts, forward march, bake, sell. This is your chance to show how much scouting means to you. Girl Scout cookies. 1 cup of butter or substitute, 1 cup of sugar, 2 tablespoons of milk, 2 eggs, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 2 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Cream, butter, and sugar, add well-beaten eggs, then milk, flavoring, flour, and baking powder. Roll thin and bake in a quick oven. Sprinkle sugar on top. This amount makes 6 to 7 dozen. So essentially, it is a simple sugar cookie, which, if I'm not mistaken, is not actually one of the options for Girl Scout cookies today. But it had to be simple because it was the Girl Scouts themselves doing the actual baking. I don't think many young girls would be up for tempering chocolate to properly form a Thin Mint today. Also, the recipe needed to be simple because the Girl Scouts were under the scrutiny of the viewing public while they were doing the baking. Back in November of 1923, when the cookies were sold in the fall, a Massachusetts newspaper invited readers to do a good turn for your stomach. Buy Girl Scout cookies tomorrow. Watch the 16 Girl Scouts bake cookies in the window of the Lynn Gas and Electric Company. Encourage the future homemakers. Now, this public spectacle was partly to drum up enthusiasm for the Girl Scout cookies, but also partly because not everyone had an oven in their home at the time that was capable of baking a bunch of cookies. Luckily, I do have such an oven, so let's get to baking some cookies. First off, you need to make sure your butter is softened. Also, this recipe doesn't include any salt, and that's because they would have been using salted butter, so if you go for unsalted, make sure to add about a half teaspoon of salt in with the flour. So take your softened butter and cream it with the sugar in a bowl until it's nice and smooth. Then beat the eggs and incorporate them into the mixture, and once mixed, add in the milk and the vanilla and mix those in as well. In a separate bowl, whisk together the flour and baking powder, and if you're using it, the salt, and then add about half of that to the batter and gently mix by hand just until the flour is incorporated. Then add the rest of the flour and continue to mix. Now, it's best to do this by hand just so you don't build up too much gluten in the flour. And here is where I can only imagine 100 years ago, many Girl Scouts were incredibly frustrated because the recipe says to roll this dough out, but it is absolutely not rollable. Even if you used very small eggs and heaping cups of flour, it is a very sticky dough right when you make it, so you can't roll it out without chilling it, which probably wouldn't have been an option for many people. I did chill it, and even then, it was still really hard to roll out. I had to put it between 2 pieces of parchment and add extra flour on the top, and yeah, it was rough. And this really bummed me out because I went on to eBay and bought this original, it's actually from the 1950s, trefoil cookie cutter, which was sent to people from Dripinator. Dripinator? I don't know, some coffee company. Anyway, I wanted to make like the original trefoil design, but it was not happening. I was finally able to get a few made after I froze the dough solid, but surely this was not the author's intent. I think much more effective than trying to roll this dough is to form the dough into balls and then set them onto a cookie sheet, leaving several inches between because they're going to spread quite a lot. Also, the recipe says this should make 6 to 7 dozen, which seems ambitious. I went with 6 dozen, and that means that each cookie is only going to be 9 grams, which is considerably smaller than the modern cookies. Whatever size you do decide to make them, set the cookie sheets in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 175 Celsius for 10 to 12 minutes or until they begin to brown around the edges. And as soon as you take them out, sprinkle plenty of sugar over the top while they are still warm. As I said, I tried to use this cookie cutter, but those cookies ended up spreading so much that they completely lost any shape, so I recut them when I took them out of the oven, but that is not ideal. That said, I was so intent on using this cookie cutter to make some trefoils that I ended up making some just kind of generic shortbread dough, which is what trefoils ended up being. So I did make some that held their shape pretty well. So in the end, I believe it was a worthwhile eBay purchase. But that is my cookie journey, and we're not here to talk about my cookie journey. We are here to talk about the cookie journey of the Girl Scouts. The year was 1911, and Juliette Gordon Low, known to her friends as Daisy, was traveling around England. Following the death of her husband, she was looking for something to fill the void, to give her life a new purpose. She tried sculpture, she tried traveling, she tried charity work, but it wasn't until she met Sir Robert Baden-Powell at a party in May of that year that she realized what her life's work was meant to be. See, Baden-Powell was the man behind a group known as the Boy Scouts, and at this time his group had about 40,000 members throughout Europe and the US, and his enthusiasm for the program was contagious. Soon after becoming acquainted, Baden-Powell introduced Mrs. Low to his sister, Agnes, who headed up an offshoot of the Scouts known as the Girl Guides. This group taught young women everything from how to spin wool to care for livestock, to knitting, cooking, and even first aid. There was also a degree of military preparedness on the agenda, something the Boy Scouts focused on. This included everything from camping to military drills to signaling, and this, Mrs. Low realized, was her calling. So she went back to Savannah, Georgia in 1912, where she was from, and immediately contacted her cousin, saying, "I've got something for the girls of Savannah, and all America, and all the world, and we're going to start it tonight." And within weeks, she had formed the first 2 American Girl Guides patrols, consisting of 18 girls. Now, Low hoped to merge her guides with the larger group of Campfire Girls, which was run by James E. West, a man who also ran the Boy Scouts of America. But West considered many of the activities that Low wanted her girls to participate in, like the military drills and the camping, to be less than feminine. And so if her girls were doing the same activities as the Boy Scouts, what would that say about the masculinity of the Boy Scouts? Clearly, the man was rather insecure. But Low said to heck with the Campfire Girls and the Boy Scouts, and after consulting her British counterparts, established a new headquarters in Washington, D.C., began a recruiting program, and changed the name from the Girl Guides to the Girl Scouts. Something James E. West tried to stop, worrying that the boys would abandon the Boy Scouts due to the similarity in name. Of course, he was wrong. Nobody abandoned the Boy Scouts because they had a similar name, and he failed to stop the name change anyway, so it doesn't really matter. The Girl Scouts were here to stay. They grew from 18 girls in 1912 to 5,000 in 1915, and to over 50,000 by the time that the cookie drive started in the early 20s. Now, technically, the first Girl Scout cookie sale was in 1917 in Muskogee, Oklahoma, when the Mistletoe Troop sold cookies in their local school cafeteria to raise some funds. But it was a one-off, and it wasn't necessarily part of the Girl Scouts as a whole, but it likely influenced the later, larger cookie sales. Those seem to have started in 1922 when a more organized cookie sale was established, though even then it was far from nationwide. It was more of a suggestion of a way to raise funds which appeared in the Girl Scouts magazine, The American Girl. It was a plan suggested by a local director of the Girl Scouts in Chicago, Illinois, a Miss Florence E. Neal. And it says, "All troops are asked to bake and sell cookies. We are enclosing recipe to be used, which makes 6 to 7 dozen. Material will cost from 26 to 36 cents. These cookies will sell for 25 to 30 cents a dozen, depending on your neighborhood. Several troops plan to use the money to start a camp fund. This is an excellent idea, and we would suggest that all troops do the same." This recipe, of course, is the one that we are baking today, and the author says that the cookies should be put into wax paper bags and then sealed with stickers with the Girl Scout logo. But it was important that the Girl Scouts didn't come off as common street urchins hawking their baked goods for a few pennies, so it instructed that cookies must not be sold in the street. Sell them at school or to your neighbors or friends, or have a cookie sale in your neighborhood store. But the best part of this first official cookie sale was neither the recipe nor the instructions on where to sell them, but the inclusion of a little poem that I can only suppose was meant to be recited to prospective customers. Cookies large and cookies small, made by scouts both short and tall. What's your order? Phone us quick, so that we may do the trick. 30 cents is all we ask, and we find it is no task to deliver to your door dozens, 1, 2, 3, or more. I think I actually bought 18 dozen. Of course, they are for the purpose of filming this episode, so it's totally fine. Though you can bet that those Thin Mints will be in my freezer for the next couple months as I just slowly chip away at them. Anyway, it seems that, at least according to newspapers from the time, that first year of cookie sales was pretty limited, mostly in and around Chicago. But the next autumn, they really took off, and that's partly because of a cookie lover in the White House. Girl Scout cookies for the president. A 5-foot bag of cookies baked by Manhattan Girl Scouts to be presented to the White House will be personally received by Mrs. Calvin Coolidge. The cookies are being baked according to the same recipe that the 1 million are treated to, one that has been approved not only by mothers, but also by grandmothers. The next week, newspapers ran images of the beloved First Lady Grace Coolidge eating one of the cookies that we are making today. But I ask you, did she like them? Well, if the Indianapolis Times is to be trusted, then Mrs. Coolidge likes Girl Scout cookies. My, but they are good, is what Mrs. Calvin Coolidge is saying as she eats one of the Girl Scouts cookies. Scouts will sell millions of these delicacies soon to collect enough money to build a new home and for the next year's expenses. And with the First Lady's endorsement, Girl Scout cookies took off. And with Prohibition in full effect, the nation was looking to the Girl Scouts to provide them with something to take the edge off. And the Scouts were happy to do so. Girl Scouts to flood the city with cookies. Cookies! Girl Scout cookies! Thousands of them! Crisp brown baked cookies. Saturday is the day of days for members of the Girl Scouts of Lynn. It will be their cookie day. From early morn until the supply is exhausted, Lynn will be swamped with cookies. As memberships in the Girl Scouts grew past 250,000 in the late 1920s, the sale of the cookies spread from one troop to another until in 1934 it came time to give the girls a break and turn the baking over to commercial bakeries. At the time, there were many, and they were licensed kind of city by city, and so there wasn't always complete uniformity between them. And even today, there are only 2 commercial bakeries now that bake them all, so they're more uniform, but the names are not, and I only learned this. So while I know Samoas and Tagalongs, in other parts of the country, they're called Caramel Delights and Peanut Butter Patties. Same cookies, totally different names, and I'm not exactly sure why. I don't know. It's absolute madness. Either way, neither of those cookies were around in the 1930s. At that time, one of the most popular cookies was the vanilla and chocolate wafer, which was said to be the favorite of then First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. Though I think she's mad for not preferring the Kooky Mint, which premiered in 1939. This was a chocolate and mint cookie, which would later also be called the Cookie Mint, the just chocolate mint, and eventually the Thin Mint. Unfortunately, the Kooky Mint only had a couple years on the market before everything came crashing down as the United States entered World War II. The rationing of eggs, sugar, and flour forced the Girl Scouts to abandon cookie production altogether, and instead they sold calendars. Everyone loves a calendar, right? Yeah, not as much as cookies. But as soon as the war was over and the rationing ended, the cookies came back. And by 1951, many of the staple cookies that are still around today, like Do-si-dos, trefoils, and Thin Mints, were already available, though under the much less exciting names of sandwiches, shortbreads, and chocolate mints. As baby boomers began to enter the Scouts in the late 50s and 60s, the sale of cookies skyrocketed, and it's never really gone away. This is partly because they're always introducing new cookies while keeping the classics like the Samoa, which was introduced in the 1970s, but also because there is a level of scarcity. They're only available one time a year, and so people stock up. I remember as a kid, my mom buying many Thin Mints and just stuffing them into our freezer so that they would last through the end of summer. She was a Thin Mintaholic. It also helps that the sale of the cookies goes to support a good cause, the Girl Scouts. It also helps that the cookies are being sold by the Girl Scouts. I mean, if I'm standing outside of a store selling cookies, I don't think it would go as well as my niece standing outside of a store selling cookies. But, as I said, she is not baking the cookies, she's just selling them. I actually baked these cookies, and so I'm going to keep them all to myself. And with that, I'll let this PSA from 1976 let you know.
The cookies are here!
And here we are, the original Girl Scout cookies from 1922. Like I said, they're not huge. They're only 9 grams of dough, so they're very thin, but the nice sugar on top really helps. They smell good, so here we go. Nice and crispy. I mean, it's a sugar cookie, but it's a delicious sugar cookie. And I do like that they're nice and crisp. This is dangerous because these are the type of cookie that you can sit down and eat like 30 of without even noticing. I made 6 dozen. So I'll put this recipe up on the Tasting History website, tastinghistory.com, as I always do. Also, when you go there, you can sign up for the newsletter, which goes out once a month. And yeah, make some Girl Scout cookies or buy some Girl Scout cookies. Goes to a good cause. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.